Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Zone Star State podcast. I'm Matthew Brune, and joining me once again is Ishmael Johnson here on Tuesday, April 8th, about 12 hours after the national championship game. Ish, how are you doing today?
Doing good. Doing okay. Had about 12 hours to let things wear off.
Yeah, Ish was texting me at like 12:30 a.m. Like, I can't believe this happened. I can't.
Dude, I was rewatching the highlights. I was rewatching the last play, and I'm just like, I was just trying to, again, like I was overanalyzing everything. I was just trying to see, what went wrong in multiple spots, and it was just like,
Yeah,
man.
Florida ends up beating Houston 65-63 in the national championship game in San Antonio. Another fantastic game, start to finish. Um, we'll break it all down. I think just from a um, overall game perspective, it it didn't go exactly how I thought, but I thought for Houston to win the game, like I
Yeah.
said, they were going to have to really defend, and I thought they were going to be able to do that at a high level, and they were. They were able to take Florida out of a lot of their stuff, especially the 3-point shot, and especially Walter Clayton. Clayton ends the game with 11 points, 7 assists, which they kind of just made him into a passer. But especially in the first half, Clayton had no space to breathe and had no success. Will Richard kept them in the game. I believe he had 14 of their first 28 points. And he ends the game with 18 points, 4 of 7 from 3. For Houston, LJ Cryer, 19 points, 4 of 11 from 3. Nobody else gets in double figures, but everybody else gets 5 plus. It was a real team effort, you felt like, from Houston to, from start to finish to keep them in the game. We even had some, Javier Francis run there.
Hmm.
But at the end, I think Florida's defense just kind of figured Houston out to a degree and kept them in the half court, and Houston wasn't able to really create anything off the bounce or really with their sets or with those two big lineups. We talked about Roberts and Tugler and Francis having some success. I think that success early was really key, but in the last 10 minutes, I felt like they couldn't get a clean look for anything. So Florida's
Yeah.
defense, I thought, was the difference in the last 10 minutes. They end up outscoring them 23-15 in the last 10 minutes and really making that run late um, to come back and get the win. And even still, Houston had the ball with the chance to tie or win the game, and they weren't able to get a shot up at the end. And Florida ends up winning the national championship, the third in their program history. And Houston comes in second. What do we say for the third time in their program history?
Third time in a title game, a loss, including both years of Phi Slama Jama, and then eighth Final Four total without a
Mm,
title, which is, I believe,
Jeez.
the most now in the country.
So that's kind of the overview there. I thought
Yeah.
Houston got to a really good start as well. It's worth noting,
Hmm.
like because of that defense, and the game went right how we expected it to go.
Yeah.
But they were only up 3 at halftime, and like I see the perspective of, like, Clayton didn't even do anything, but I still think they did a good enough job on Clayton. The hard part was, like, Richard started hitting shots, and like their
Hmm.
bigs weren't giving them anything. And it felt like all Florida had was like Will Richard to a degree, and Houston was still only up 3, and they could never really, really separate. But in the second half, Houston goes up, what was it, 12? Yeah, they're
It
up
was 12.
12
Yeah.
with 16 minutes left. And I was like, okay, Houston, just keep defending. And then they scored 21 points in the last 16 minutes of the game, and it wasn't enough.
Yeah. Yeah. It feels like, I mean, if you would have told me that one team would have collapsed down, not collapsed, but bit right a little bit down the stretch, it wouldn't have been Houston. They're up 12 and they were like, okay. Like I thought, like when they were up, let me see what the largest lead was indeed. Let me see. Yeah, 12 with, yeah, 15 minutes. I thought the game was a wrap. Like, because one, not only is it hard to come back in general against Houston, I think Tracy Wolfson asked Golden afterward, was like, hey, what's this? What is Golden said, like, hey, being down 10 is like being down 15, to Houston.
Yeah.
And also the fact that Houston does not blink down the stretch, and they're the team that makes you blink. And the fact that they were, like you mentioned, they were the ones that blinked. They were the ones that had the mistakes. They're the ones that also they started calling the game a lot tighter on both ends
Yes.
in the second half, right? Florida
Mhm.
basically played 17 minutes in the bonus, which is impressive on their parts that they played as well defensively as they did while being in the bonus and then the double bonus for so much of that second half. But that resulted in some foul trouble. Javier Francis picked up four. Tugler ended up fouling out. So like there was some physicality that again, Houston's a team that rides that line, right? They ride that line defensively. They're gonna make the ref kind of put their stamp on a game, and if they don't, okay, we've seen some teams really struggle when their intensity is ramped up. Florida was able to match that, and I think that Houston wasn't able to adjust to the second half in terms of the second half whistle, I should say, because you had Tugler making some very clumsy foul. The one he fouled out on the fourth foul I think he had was very clumsy, kind of an over the back, and it was like, okay,
Yeah.
like you can't be doing that. Um, Juwan Roberts got in some. I don't know if he finished with three. Anyway, there was like minor foul trouble along the way. Uzan picked up three fouls. But yeah, you mentioned it. It was the shooting that I think bit Houston in the end. The outside shooting wasn't there from the first half, basically at all. Um, outside of Richards, it wasn't there for Florida either. And I texted you at halftime. I was like, the fact that this is a one possession game and Clayton has no points,
Yeah.
like that is a. I had a bad feeling about that for Florida for Houston because on one hand you could say okay Richards and Condon and Haw they're not going to sustain that so eventually Florida's going to they're going to need Clayton so that's what I would hope happened but instead what happened was everybody else kept going right and Houston's the one that faded and then Clayton kind of got what he needed late
Yeah.
and I think the philosophy I think Houston had the right philosophy game plan going into this, which is make someone else beat us, right? Um, we're gonna swarm the ball screens. Anytime they set a pick for Clayton, it's gonna be automatic double or hedge. We're gonna get the ball out of his hands.
Yeah.
Anytime Richards had the ball, it wasn't as hard of hedging. They were kind of letting him shoot. But in the end, if I told you Walter Clayton had 11 points in this game, you would just assume Houston wins that by double digits. What ended up happening? Will Richard had 18, Alex Condon had 12, Elijah Martin had 7, Denzel Aberdeen played big minutes, had 7,
Mhm.
and Houston's big players didn't get the shots they needed late. Juwan Roberts, 8 points on 3 of 13. Uzan, who I texted you, I was like, dude, Uzan's useless from offensively right now. He was
Yeah.
not hitting his
He's
shot.
struggling.
He was really struggling. Cryer was the one that had to kind of sustain them for the whole game. Sharp was able to find his shot kind of in the second half, and Malik Wilson was having to find, and it was like a lot of guys that they did not have to depend on offensively were kind of having to pull the ship like Malik Wilson, like Javier Francis,
Mhm.
because they needed somebody. Florida's size, I think, bothered them definitely
Yeah.
a little bit, not to an insane degree, but still a little bit. And yeah, in the end, I was frustrated that there was two plays called for Emmanuel Sharp, who was not that great in this game, in my opinion. I know the last play there was a call. The first read was Cryer to get a shot, but he ended up, needing to pass the ball out to Sharp. But it's just a uncharacteristic way for things to end, which is basically two turnovers in the final 30 seconds.
There's so much to just think about here because they held Florida to 65 points.
Yeah,
Like,
I think there was a stat that said like in games Houston holds a team to under 70 or something or 75, they're like nine like under Kelvin Sampson, they're like 60 something and five or something. It was like
yeah.
they had like five losses basically.
Like, they held the number 2 offense in the country to 65 points. I
Yeah.
can't ask anything more defensively what they did. And like you said, they really started calling the game really tight for in the second half, and the fouls stacked up. I know Florida picked up a lot of fouls too, which led to that, what was it, the technical from the bench at one point.
Mhm.
But from that point on, like, Florida went on its run. Florida ends the
Yeah.
game with 21 free throws to Houston's 14. There's a +8 disparity in terms of free throws made for Florida, and that's really the only difference I can see because Houston offensive rebounded to the level that we expected to. I thought,
Here it is. 33-0 this year when holding teams to under 70. Houston.
yeah, Houston offensive rebounded, Houston defended, and I think Houston took away Walter Clayton.
Mhm.
Like, from that standpoint, Houston could not have executed this any better. The
Right.
problem comes from a this was Houston's best 3-point shooting team
Yeah.
of, its tenure. They're the third best 3-point shooting team in the country, 39%, and that was the difference this year. The difference was they weren't Texas A&M. They're not just throwing the ball at the rim and going to go get it. Like, they're
Right.
actually making shots this year. And to not make shots in the national championship game, again, Florida didn't make shots either, but Sharp going 1 for 7 and Uzen going 0 for 4, that can't
Hmm.
happen.
Yeah.
Like, that's what loses you the game here is you have to just make enough shots to where holding Florida to 65 points should win
Yeah.
you the game, especially when you're up 12 in the second half.
Yep.
Um, but it wasn't. And I do think Florida had a lot to do with that. I give their size a lot of credit. I give Golden a lot of credit because they were able to turn it up and take away like none of the actions Houston was running, none of the ball screens, none of the dribble handoffs. Like Houston has obviously plays two bigs, and so the
Hmm.
spacing isn't great a lot of times, but usually they can get something going downhill, and they just couldn't get anything, I thought. And that's
Yeah.
where you needed Cryer and these guys to make threes, and they didn't. So the
Yeah.
combination just started to compile onto each other, and it wasn't enough. So it's hard because I think Houston did so many good things in this game, but when shots don't fall and Uzan's not, playing to the level he expects to play at, and Sharp was inconsistent, then it's like, damn, they just didn't make shots. Like it just wasn't good enough offensively, which sucks because this is a really good Houston offense.
I was about to say, I think if you're a Houston fan, you named all the things of why it's frustrating. Like you essentially lost playing your game, right?
Yeah,
Like
like
this
if
was a
Florida would have came out
Houston,
and bombed threes or something and went like
right.
8 of 20 from 3, then okay, but no, they didn't.
They play like they slowed the Houston slowed the game down, right?
Yep.
This was like very like Florida like barely got any fast break points. I think Houston might have beat them in fast break points, if I'm being honest. It wasn't it up, but like Golden was saying that in the first half. He was like, yeah, we want to get the ball out, we want to push the tempo, and they weren't able to do that. And yeah, like that's kind of the more frustrating thing is like you see how well you played, and it just be a couple mistakes on your end, and like the not even like again they didn't shoot like the worst from three, right? We've seen Houston teams shoot 24%. Yes, obviously not great, but like we've seen Houston teams do that before, right, from three.
Mhm.
And the fact that this is the game in which you go, you go cold from three, and you go against another team that was able to find because like Florida didn't shoot well from three, right? Clayton hit 1 3, 1 of 7. Elijah Martin 1 of 6, right? Will Richard was 4 of 7, but like they didn't shoot well from three, but they were able to create stuff on the inside. They were able to,
Yeah. Get
get the
fouled.
ball to Condon a little bit. They were able. Will Richard did a great job of driving inside when he couldn't. There was a couple of drives in the lane that he had. Aberdeen came off the bench and like all of a sudden was like penetrating the lane. And you mentioned the action, and I think it was such a chess match in this game. It was like very, very fun to watch because, of course, Houston came out with their aggressive ball screens, particularly when Clayton had the ball, right? That was their strategy, get the ball out of his hands, which they did a good job of, make him take a lot of tough shots. Florida in the second half basically just ran like a bunch of curl action because like they realized like, okay, we're not able to run pick and roll. Like we just couldn't, they can't
Yeah.
run pick and roll. And so they just ran a ton of horn sets. They ran double screens. They ran short picks. Or short rolls. They ran a ton of hook actions, curl actions, and like getting the ball very quickly, like to where as soon as that double comes, boom, ball's out of the hands, or somebody's making a read, or it's a give and go, and like the bigs just finding like it was such an incredible chess match adjustment that Samson later adjusted to as well defensively, ramping it up again. That I mean, I couldn't help but like sit there when regardless it was still like 50-50 up in the air. I'm like, these are the two best teams in the country. Like these two teams, and possibly again, at least for this year, the two best coaches going at it because you just saw adjustment after adjustment after adjustment after adjustment, and it really was a great summary of what the season was as a sport as a whole. But yeah, like of course, like we're heartbroken for Houston. This was the team on paper that should have, that was the best of their squad. And you end up you end up losing because like, Haw ends up like a pirouette almost layup for
Oh,
and
yeah.
one on a fast break on a block that he happened to get. I think it was on Sharp, or I think it was on Uzan. I couldn't remember who he got that block on, but it was like an and one that like basically made it a one possession game again, and Florida never looked back.
Yeah, I'm just looking through. That was Houston's lowest offensive rating for a game since December 30th.
Mm,
They had some poor shooting games, like at
sure,
times
sure,
throughout the season, like they were up and down.
yeah,
But 6 of 25. I mean, in the tournament, they were 10 of 28, 8 of 16, 9 of 23, 9 of 25, 10 of 22.
mm,
Even in the conference tournament, they were great.
yeah,
Really,
100%.
this is the worst shooting performance for them since March 1st. Like they've been so
Yeah,
good and so consistent shooting the ball. It hurts that like that's how it ends here because they're more than capable of shooting the ball better than that. But
mhm,
ball doesn't go in the hoop sometimes. This is still just to give our reflection, I guess, on this team real quick. Like you said,
yeah,
this is still an incredible team, an incredible season, 35-5. And like we said, they started the year 4-3. Like
hmm
straight up, they started the year 4-3 and they ended 35-5. And they were 35-4 going into the last game of the season. And the only other loss was to Texas Tech in overtime, which was a weird game. But
yeah,
they just rolled everybody else. 19-1 in conference, win the regular season championship, win the conference championship for the Big 12.
yeah,
Like it is an absolutely incredible season. They beat the number, and I'm on Bart Torvik now. This isn't Ken Palm, but the number 8 team in the country, then the 15, then 8, then 2, and then lost to the number 4 team in the country. And Bart Torvik had Houston number 1, like the last part of the year in their
yeah.
ranking. I know we reference Ken Palm a lot, but Houston's had them number 1 and still has them number 1 in their rankings over Duke and Auburn and Florida. So an absolutely incredible season for Kelvin Sampson and company. And for those looking for a silver lining, I've seen about 3 way too early top 25s, and all of them have Houston number 1. If
I
you
was gonna
want,
say it's
you want to go positive here, it's gonna
yeah.
they're not falling off a cliff, and they have 3 5 stars coming in.
I was gonna say, so that's the thing is I mentioned that this is the end of an era for Houston because I genuinely believe that they're like this
Yes,
what they're not falling off, but this is an end of an era. Juwan Roberts, LJ Cryer, Javier Francis, Malik Wilson, all gone. Right.
yeah.
We'll see what happens. If they can hold on, which I presume they can, if they can hold on to the likes of Sharp, Tugler. Well, Tugler's an interesting one because like Tugler may get some NBA prospects.
He should,
Um,
dude. This dude
and
is
yeah,
so I thought he was fantastic to start the game.
yeah,
And he got in foul trouble, so he got hit in the chest, but
yeah.
like Tugler was the best big on the court for the first 2
If
minutes.
if they lose, I agree. I think they should start the year number one regardless. But if they lose Tugler and Roberts,
Then it's tough.
that's a tough one. But like you said, Chris Sinak, Kingston Flemings, Isaiah Harwell, right? So there's one. Flemings and Sharp probably are your backcourt with Harwell playing as a maybe a three or whatever. We'll see what they do there. Um, Sinak and taking over your front court by himself, but we've also seen Houston have no issues with the portal. So like
This
you
will
can
be
portal in. Yeah.
this might be the first time they have to go portal a big though since Carlton, Justice Carlton. Is that a throwback name for people? Was that 3 years ago?
No, no, you're thinking of Justice Carlton plays for Texas now. You're thinking of
I got it.
the
Let me find it.
girl big for Texas. I know who you're talking about though. It is
Let me
It is last name's Carlton.
let me find it. 2022, right? I think it was. Josh Carlton. Thank you.
Josh Carlton. Yeah.
Josh Carlton. That
Was
he
he a
transferred from
portal?
UConn to
That's right.
Houston for 1 season, and he
Yeah.
was really good. Like he
Look,
was
yeah, they haven't. I mean, they haven't had issues in the portal, right? If they needed a point guard, they got Milo Suzan. They needed a scorer, they got LJ. Like they Houston's been very smart with how they've used the portal. Um, they internally develop and then they fill a hole every once in a while. So yeah, I think they do have to go get a starting big. Um, but regardless, you have if Uzan comes back, to Houston, I assume he will. You have Uzan, Sharp, Flemings, Harwell, whatever that combination of a backcourt is. And
yeah.
then, of course, you have Sinak kind of taking over. If you lose Tugler, I presume you probably might, especially with this draft being so top heavy in terms of like the top 3 to 5, that
Mhm.
I think there's a lot of room for like him to move up into the first round and like that I don't know lottery necessarily, but you know what I'm saying. Um, it'll be interesting to see what he does, but I wouldn't be shocked if he comes back.
I think so. I clicked on I think it was John Rothstein's story, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, John Rothstein's story. Project Houston number 1, projected starting 5, Uzan, Sharp, Arsenault, Tugler, Cenac as the 5.
I mean,
I
yeah, like
wouldn't.
that's I mean, look, I have issues with that offensively, the ceiling of that, but I think defensively, I think that's just as good potentially.
I don't think, and this is an off-season podcast talk, but
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
you're fine.
think they would start Cenac I don't think Cenac starts at the 5. I like physically, like he's
Hmm.
really, really skilled, and this
Yeah,
is why it's gonna be interesting with Cenac. This is a whole offseason but like Cenac's interesting because he's more of an offensive player than
yeah,
anybody that Houston's had at the forward spot since I don't even know when. Like he is a
hmm,
true 5-star because he can like score it at every level and he's a
right.
freaking offensive machine. So that pairing with Tugler would be awesome, but like from a rebounding and defense perspective, I think he would have some ways to go. But
Yeah,
regardless, like this lineup, the point is Houston's not falling off now. Like
they'll be fine.
Houston will be back. Houston's already
Yeah,
second in FanDuel's championship winner for 2026 odds. Like they're gonna be fine. And
yeah,
so this doesn't stop for them. They're gonna continue to make a run. They're gonna continue to be a Final Four picks in the future. I
sure.
mean, but we're
So,
coming off of a run where they were on Ken Palm fifth in 2021, then second,
mhm,
second, second, second. That's the last 5 years for
yeah,
Houston basketball. That is outstanding.
yeah, they will be just fine. I don't think anybody in the Big 12 is even in the top 10 in recruiting. Um, obviously the portal is what it is
Kansas?
in this era, so like we'll have to see. No, Kansas isn't in the top 10. As far
Mm.
as recruiting. This is high school recruiting. Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so like, look, the only teams ahead of them are Duke, who's bringing in the Boozer twins, which are that's gonna be crazy.
Yeah.
UConn and Kentucky, and so like those they're not gonna have to see those teams in until March, unless they play them in non-conference. But as far as the Big 12 is concerned, right, we'll see what Tech does in the portal. We'll see what these teams do. But like, yeah, I think Houston should be the number one, very clearly the number one team in the Big 12 at the very least.
Yeah. Tech is gonna be their main rival
Yeah,
for a little
if they can
bit.
retain most of,
Toppin,
I was about to say they don't lose anyone.
McMillan.
They lose
So
McMillan,
they're
right?
people on Texas Tech Twitter is already talking about how they're spending a whole bag to keep Toppin, Williams, and McMillan.
Well,
But
they should. Yeah,
if it
I think
happens,
they lose Hawkins
yeah, they'll lose
and they
Hawkins.
lose Walton. So again, not the war. Like again, I'm not saying Hawk. You're gonna find Elijah Hawkins off the bench or off the street, but
And
like
McMillan should be done
I think
unless I'm
McMillan's
looking at the wrong.
done.
McMillan played
Walton,
5
good
years.
contributor, but you can replace Walton. Um, so yeah, they got to rebuild the backcourt, but they have the money to, right? We're seeing what they're doing in football.
Yes. Um, Now I'm looking up Chance McMillan's eligibility because I thought I saw someone say getting him back, but I was like, this dude's been here for 5 years.
I was about to say he's been there a while.
I don't see how he would still have eligibility. But regardless, like
Yeah,
Texas Tech is Graham McCasland. Like it's gonna be Houston versus Tech for top. Like that's gonna be the rivalry for like the next like 5 years, or
yeah, it feels like it.
until Kelvin Sampson retires, in which his son will take over, and we'll see if he can keep it going. But like that's the
Mhm.
lineup, and then BYU also gets AJ DeBonsta. So
That's a good. Yeah, BYU is throwing a bag around,
the
so
Big
we'll see
12
what
will
they
be
do.
better than it was this year. I
Yes,
think. I think that's safe to say. Like no,
I
no
think so
offense.
because like we'll see. Obviously, the Rob Wright thing messed things up for Baylor a little bit, but they're still bringing in
Yes.
Michael Rataj and then Obi Ashbim from Wyoming. So they're swinging in the portal as well. So like I think yeah, teams are reloading. Right,
Kansas
it's
will be
just that
better.
Kansas will be better. Teams are
Iowa
reloading,
State.
but I still, like I said, that's kind of that unknown factor kind of makes me more comfortable picking Houston in a lot of those
Yes.
situations.
Me too. Me too. It's just an interesting look ahead for Houston in the Big 12 here.
Yeah,
Um, Anything else on this game or this season for Houston here before we wrap up? Um, they People on Twitter are saying the balls are too inflated-ish. I don't know if you saw this.
I didn't see that.
You didn't see it? So there's
No.
it pops up on my feed now, but
Yeah.
it's honestly been a thing the past couple years, or maybe I just see it. But there's always these people who track the inflation of the ball, the basketballs, and they're like, this championship ball, like the Final Four balls, they're saying were good inflation.
Yeah.
But then the championship game, like within 3 minutes, people like actual people who like do this quote unquote were like, these balls are way too inflated, like they can't dribble them, they can't pass them, this is why the shooting's bad, da, 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 da.
Uh,
I have no clue if it actually was the case,
yeah.
but both teams shot terribly from the field. So, and I'm not complaining because I actually think that favors Houston. So that's why I'm like, hey, if the ball was overinflated, cool. Houston gets an advantage because Florida can't make shots. But
Right.
that was just something I saw, and I was like, these teams are shooting pretty badly. So
Yeah.
I'm not against it.
Eh.
But yeah. Anything else here?
No, man. I mean, it was a fun season. I'm glad. Like again, the result was different, but like I'm genuinely glad we got three insanely good games to end the season.
Off-season podcast idea: ranking the top 10 teams the last 10 years. There you go.
Ooh, I like that. I like that. I like that.
I'm a big list guy.
I am
I'm
too.
listing things, ranking things.
Let's do
Um,
it.
there's a podcast idea, but before we get to that, we got to do all the transfers, all the coaching changes.
Yeah. By the way,
So,
as we were recording, Talia Parker just committed to TCU as well.
and Olivia Miles
Olivia
might
Miles was this morning, officially this morning, but I'm literally saying as we were recording, Talia Parker from A&M just committed to TCU as well. So,
TCU, man. Hey,
dude,
Friday we'll probably do one coaches one transfer one, and then
I can't.
go.
Yeah, yeah. We're living in a world where TCU is a big money spender in the women's market. They're over here literally calling in NBA
Hey,
draft picks and
Mark
saying, "Hey, we
Campbell.
got you."
Mark Campbell said we could have him on the pod anytime, so I might have to just go hit him up again.
Yeah, we might have to talk
We'll
about
have a
what the
weekly
hell's
pod with
going
Mark
on.
Campbell. But all right, that's all we got for y'all today. Hope y'all enjoyed the episode. Leave us a like, comment, share, subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you all for a great season. Hope y'all enjoyed it. But it keeps going. The off season is just starting, so stick with us here. And we will talk to y'all later.